Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. In this video, we are going to learn chapter 8, IT sourcing, right? So you will learn about IT decision on whether IT assets are to be developed and maintained in the company or outside the company. Okay, which is in the company is insourcing, outside the company is outsourcing. So it is a matter of how and where to outsource what IT, right? So based on our roadmap for this course, we are still in the last part of this course, which is governance, right? Okay, these are the agenda for this chapter. We are going to start with explores the phenomenon of IT sourcing and describe two challenges with two antidotes each. Okay, and for not letting sources undermine strategy, there are 5 things to consider on where to outsource an IT project. Okay, so I have provided additional video regarding the IT, what is outsourced. You can watch the video, right? Okay, these are the jargon used throughout this chapter. IT sourcing, meaning the decision about whether you develop and maintain your IT assets in your company or outside your company. Okay, offshoring, meaning you do outsourcing to a foreign vendor or using your own employees in a foreign facility. Community outsourcing, uh, which means you are using open source. Okay, tapered outsourcing, um, you are doing the upfront design of a project in-house before handing off the rest of an outside vendor. Concurrent sourcing, you do simultaneously in sourcing and outsourcing the same sort of IT activities. Okay, back sourcing, meaning that you are bringing back outsourced IT activities in-house. And the last one is outsourcing challenges, meaning the problem with outsourcing. Outsourced system does not play well with your existing IT system, or you end up with a system that you never wanted. Okay. Okay, we start with the phenomenon of IT sourcing in most companies. All right, why they do IT sourcing? Okay, first phenomena is due to core competence logic. This method has led to wholesale outsourcing, which many companies decided that developing IT systems was not one of their business, and that's why they outsource their IT. And another reason is because they want higher quality at a lower cost, so they use IT resources wholesale. And now, Trifecta had made IT inseparable from firms offering. Okay, Trifecta is digitization, software infusion, and ubiquitous connectivity, right? And IT also increasingly defines the following firms: okay, Medtronic, Pacemaker, Progressive Insurance, Taco Bell, Tacos, and Netflix, which is offer streaming services. Right? So all of the IT services supporting these companies turn out to be a one-way street, which means they cannot make U-turn. Okay, um, meaning that they cannot change their decision that they made. All right. So the second phenomena is perpetual challenges in outsourcing IT. Right. Okay. There are two perpetual problems in outsourcing IT. The first one is integration problems. Okay. That is the pieces do not fit, meaning that a delivered project works fine by itself but does not play well with other IT assets in your firm. And an outsourced system must often must use data produced by other apps or send data to them. Right? That's what is the integration problems. So the second one is receiving the wrong system. Um, Technically, uh, the system that you receive is fine, but it's it is unable to serve its intended business purpose. In this case, IT vendors often pinpoint volatile clients' requirement as the culprit. Okay. Okay. The third phenomena is decision about whether, how, and where to outsource what IT. And this must go beyond the outdated in-source outsource dichotomy. Okay, dichotomy means a contrast between two things that are represented as being opposed or entirely different. Okay, two innocuous reason to outsource can create vicious problems. In other words, there are two simple excuses that companies usually give when they do outsourcing, which can create a problem. Okay, number one is to access IT skills absent in-house. Okay, the second reason is vendor cheaper than doing it in-house. Okay, uh, these are the phenomenon of IT sourcing. Okay, there are three unstrategic IT sourcing decisions. Actually, this IT sourcing decision is referring to IT related activities that companies or firms often incorrectly consider as a corporate IT sourcing decision. Okay. Um, okay. Basically, um, IT sourcing broadly refers to where are your IT assets developed and maintained. Okay. Um, there are three routines for non-strategic IT management activities, which are business process outsourcing, commodity IT infrastructure and services, and commodity software. So business process outsourcing, such as customer support, okay, call centers, using remote workers to do grunt work such as data cleansing or crowdsourcing. Okay, there are consequences of IT use rather than the production of IT assets themselves, right? And they are the purview of operations sourcing, not IT sourcing. Okay. Okay. Commodity IT infrastructure implementation and IT services, such as internet connectivity, which are routinely outsourced. Okay, for example, all IT hardware purchases, operating systems, and networking gear fall under IT infrastructure. Okay. The third one is commodity software. It is about commoditized software packages, which is usually when you're dealing with negotiating price, service, and contracts. It is done by IT unit. Okay. There are also three types of activities that have strategic consequences that need non-IT managers' involvement, which are software that is embedded into your firm's products or services. Okay, custom built business applications into which your firm's business processes are baked. Okay, the last one is one-off, which is non-recurring IT tasks. All right. Okay, insourcing versus outsourcing. Just to recap back, insourcing is the practice of using your own employees to accomplish IT activities, and outsourcing is the practice of using outsiders called IT vendors. So to compare between insourcing and outsourcing, we have to look at the advantages and disadvantages of these two activities. Okay, we start with the advantages of insourcing. The first one is in-house IT employees have a natural alignment of interest, which means what is good for your firm is also good for them, right? The second one is insourcing retains IT skills and expertise within your firm, which is insiders will often have a better appreciation than outsiders of your firm's culture. okay, which is ways of doing things, and idiosyncrasies. And the third one is towards imitation, meaning that inner work, inner workings are better protected when they do not venture out of your firms. Okay, so disadvantages of insourcing is lack of in-house skill, meaning that your firm might not have some needed IT skill, and potentially costlier, meaning that an outside firm couldn't do the same work at a potentially lower cost. Okay, so now we look at outsourcing. Advantages of outsourcing. The first one is can access skills that absent in-house, and then cheaper for intermittent IT work. Okay, the disadvantages of outsourcing are the team member is not your employees ever, and disconnect from business needs, right? Okay, this diagram shows the IT sourcing decision tree, which summarize the choices available to a firm for sourcing IT, whether it is insourcing, outsourcing, or concurrent sourcing. So for insourcing, it is where a firm's in-house IT unit, which is typically does work, okay, or a firm can also choose to create a captive center, which is a dedicated IT development facility staffed by a firm's employees, and with all the upsides of insourcing, right? There are two types of captive center, foreign or rural. For foreign, captive centers are most commonly located in foreign country, which is typically to access a talent pool unavailable at the same cost domestically, or to localize its IT activities to a foreign market where it has a significant presence. Okay, for example, all major American firms such as Boeing, Microsoft, Apple, and Google have captive centers in India, Canada, and many more countries for that reason. Okay, uh, although the sun is the time zones of the major outsourcing destinations relative to 8 a.m. in the United States East Coast. Okay, rural is a second type of captive center, which is located in a rural domestic area where IT talent is readily available and costs are lower. Okay, for example, many American firms operate captive centers in university towns with major research university. Okay. Although the skills available through rural sourcing, which is largely part-time student workers, it might be inferior to foreign captive center because the commonalities in culture and essence make them attractive for IT work, okay, which is requires interacting with customers, right? Okay, next is outsourcing, where a firm has three alternative: domestic firm, offshore, and community. Okay, in domestic firm, um, outsourced service delivered through internet, which is cloud sources, and outsourced to multiple vendors, uh, called multiple sources. And for offshore foreign firm, it is a special case of outsourcing to a vendor in other country, right? This approach is identical to domestic firm, but offshoring entails three risks: uh, language barrier, contractual enforcement, and currency fluctuation. And it also use a multi-sourcing strategy to speed IT development by using follow the sun model, okay, which is by picking three locations about 8 hours apart in time zones, for example, Paris, San Francisco, and India. However, multi-sourcers spread the risk of one vendor underperforming because everyone is supplier. Okay, tapered sourcing is about doing the upfront design of a project in-house before handing off the rest to an outside vendor, right? Okay, benchmark for cloud sourcing um, is regarding the outsourced services can sometimes be delivered through the internet and outsourced to multiple IT vendors, which is multi-sourcing, widely used for specialized business application that the firm rents but does not own and pay subscription fee. Okay, and it is usually cheaper. All right. Okay, next is for community outsourcing. It is a community of individuals which is outsourced rely on a community or of individuals rather than a contract firm to accomplish the outsourced IT activities. Okay, there are three types of community, which are open source, crowdsource, and uh, ecosystem. Okay, open source communities are online communities that freely share the software code that they develop. Basically, you can freely modify most open source code and use it for business with one stringent requirement. And you must share any modified software code back with the community as open source. Okay. For example, the popular open source code repository is sourceforge.com, right? So most commercial grade open source software follows a razor blade model, right? Which is the software itself is free, but you pay an outside firm to integrate it with your firm's existing IT asset and to provide maintenance support, right? For crowdsourcing alternative, it is where a firm enlists a paid or unpaid group of customer, which is the scope of crowdsourcing IT works is limited to online customer support message boards, um, where they help each other with technical problems or with data cleansing. For example, customer tagging photos on Google Maps. And another example is beta testing of software before public release. Okay, so ecosystem lets outsiders build a software extension around its own IT system with an engagement to split the revenue that they generate. Uh, Actually, the most visible example are thousands of small applications that third-party developers build for mobile consumer platform like iOS and Android. Okay, example of nanotechnology firms, non-profits and governments organizations that have used this approach include Nikki. Okay, next we go back to concurrent sourcing. It is where IT insourcing and outsourcing are not mutually exclusive, but simultaneously insource and outsource the same types of IT activities. All right. So this approach of concurrent sourcing simultaneously exploits the advantages and safeguards against the disadvantages of both insourcing and outsourcing. I think that's all about the IT sourcing decision tree. Okay, two challenges in outsourcing IT. Basically, there are two perpetual challenges that make it harder to realize business value from outsourced IT projects. Even you have a competent IT vendor working with diligent staff from your IT unit. Okay, the challenges are integration problems and receiving the wrong system. Okay, integration problems regarding the pieces don't fit, meaning that the problem arises when a delivered project works fine by itself but does not play well with other IT assets in your firm, right? And another problem is you can rarely transplant an application custom built outside your firm to plug and play with your patchwork of proprietary and custom tweak systems, which might span a generation of technology. Okay, uh, an outsourced system often use data produced by other apps or send data to them, and the integration costs frequently exceed expectation and can wipe out any potential savings from outsourcing. Okay, challenge number two is receiving the wrong system. It is regarding IT vendors often pinpoint volatile client requirement as the culprit. Okay. However, volatile requirements do not necessarily mean that your IT unit or line function are indecisive, which is not clearly defined. So, a project requirements might be latent and require intense interaction between business users and IT developers to iteratively flesh out. Right? So, outsourcing adds extra translator layer, which is IT unit, between users and vendors. Okay, double whammy is referring to a situation where two bad things happen at the time. Okay, for example, an outsourced project simultaneously faces a business IT language chasm between the users and IT unit, and a cultural barrier between IT unit and an outside IT vendor. Okay. Okay, finally, you might get what your IT unit asked for, but you not not what you needed, right? And this is why you might receive the wrong system, right? Okay, there are two strategies following integration cost, which are concurrent outsourcing and verify then trust approach. Okay, concurrent IT sourcing is the practice of simultaneously insourcing and outsourcing the same sort of IT projects. Okay, you need just a trace as little as 10% by volume of work done in-house to benefit from concurrent IT sourcing. That's sufficient enough. Okay, so because by doing this, it prevents outsourcing from being irreversible. All right. And it also helps you to write better contracts and better specifications for IT sourcing. And this practice also will foster a healthy competition between in-house IT and vendors. Okay, the second strategy is by adopting verify then trust approach. Okay, this is a Japanese style screening, which is using dummy projects. Okay, um, okay, before they doing the IT sourcing, basically they create a dummy project to vendor and IT unit. Then the winner is the trusted sources. Okay. Okay. Now a strategy to avoid the wrong system. Okay, there are two strategy, which is number one is tapered outsourcing, and the second one is match requirements ambiguity with contract choice. Okay. Okay, tapered outsourcing regarding doing the upfront design of a project in-house before handing off the rest to an outside vendor. Okay, um, tapered outsourcing is widely practiced in Japanese firm. All right, and this diagram illustrate tapered outsourcing delays. Okay, when the handoff to a vendor occurs, which is in other words, the handoff to a vendor occurs much later at stage 2, and your in-house IT unit completely own the front end of the development process, which is involve requirements and high-level design at stage 1. Okay, so you can think of this approach as a control through design. It is used to overcome language barriers or cultural differences, all right? And the hands off to the vendor are in language independence with standardized design notation, such as using unified modeling language and screen mockups. All right. So this is like a blueprint that an architect would hand off to a contractor for building a house, right? And to avoid misinterpretation. Okay. However, tapered outsourcing demands business savvy software design skills in your firm's in-house IT unit. Okay. All right. In contrast of Japanese approach is American approach. Okay, this one where the handoff occurs at the earlier requirement stage. Okay, this approach also dominates most countries outside Japan. Okay, for strategy number 2, match requirements ambiguity with contract choice, or in other words, is structuring flexibility into contracts. Okay, to structure IT outsourcing contracts uh, as fixed price contracts that pay the vendor a lump sum or completing a project. Okay, as a time and materials contracts that pay the vendor for the hours of labor actually used to complete a project, which is flexible but greater cost variability. And this strategy lean towards time and materials when project requirements ambiguous. Okay. Okay. Now we discuss about what should never be outsourced. For criteria number 1, mission criticality and differentiation potential. This diagram illustrates a project's mission criticality and differentiation potential. So what should never be outsourced? Okay. It is about a consideration whether a project is for a mission critical IT asset and potentially a competitive differentiator from your rival. Okay, look at cell number 4. It is about an IT system is a mission critical if its failure would jeopardize a primary activity in your firm's value chain. For example, sales, production, or operation. And a mission critical system that also potentially differentiate your firm. For example, strategic apps and embedded software. It is should be done in-house. Okay. So cell number 3, it is about if a project is a potential competitive differentiator from your rivals, but is not mission critical. So insourcing is still preferable for a different reason, right? Um, insourcing safeguard again imitation, and is more conclusive, is more conducive to intense in-house iteration required to uncover latent business need. Okay, cell number 2. If a project is an operational necessity rather than a strategic differentiator, it can be outsourced if it is not mission critical, right? Most cloud sourced IT services fall into this cell. Okay, cell number 1. If it is also mission critical, you can still outsource it with these 2 reasons. The first reason is if your firm also maintains in-house IT expertise in the project's technical domain, okay, for example, does concurrent IT sourcing, that's the reason number 1. And if you can have a contractually enforceable performance guarantees to keep it from becoming an operational liability. So the concurrent mix of insourcing and outsourcing in this cell should more towards the side that has better technical talent available. Concurrent IT sourcing can also strengthen in-house IT expertise in the project's domain by learning from specialist vendors. Okay, I think that's all for number 1. Okay, now criteria number 2, interaction intensity and labor intensity. So this diagram illustrates a project's labor intensity and demand for business IT interaction. Okay, what should never be outsourced? Okay, it is consideration whether a project's labor intensity and the need for intense interaction between business users in the line functions and IT staff. Okay, cell number 4. It is about if the need for such interaction is low, you can readily specify a project's requirement in writing. Okay, and outsourcing is appropriate for such projects when they are also labor intensive, right? Okay, this is also the ideal profile of a project that can be outsourced to lower cost with precise, stable requirement and labor intense. Okay, now go to cell number 3. If labor intensity is low, outsource for expertise, which mean need outsource because you lack in-house IT skills to do the job. Okay, for the right part of this figure, right, it is about the project with a high need for business IT interaction. We're telling us that a project's needs are too latent, which is hidden, to be articulated in a document that you can hand over to an outside vendor. Okay, if you cannot describe what your firm needs, you cannot successfully outsource it, right? So intense interaction are needed in projects where it is difficult to precisely specify business requirements upfront and difficult to verify that a delivered project meets its business intent. So you can write a spec, right? Okay, for cell number 1 and 2, it is about most IT-based business innovations that can create a competitive advantage. Okay, cell number 2, projects demanding intense business IT interaction should be sourced if their labor intensity is low. Right? Cell number 1 is about if they are labor intense, tapered outsourcing controls their design without entirely forsaking the benefits of outsourcing. Right, that's all. Okay, chain of responsibility in IT outsourcing. This diagram shows the chain of responsibility in an outsourced IT project, okay, which is about IT unit is accountable to non-IT managers, which is from line function, for the project achieving its business objective. Okay, IT unit is the client to the vendor to which the project is outsourced, and IT unit responsibility to ensure that the vendor meets the technical specification specified by your IT unit. Okay, ensuring all this requires of two things. Okay, formal controls and CMM ratings. Formal control used by IT units on vendors. Okay, these are combination of output metrics and process control. Okay, output metrics that rewards a penalized vendor for meeting predefined objective targets in the delivered work. Okay, this will need vendor outputs to be measurable and specifiable project requirements. Okay, so process control dictate methods a vendor should follow, and it works only when your technical expertise in the project domain is superior than the vendors. Okay, CMM ratings measures the capability maturity, which is rating on 1 to 5, 1 worst and 5 best. Okay, basically CMM ratings such as eBay seller eBay seller rating are trustworthy but imperfect. Okay, okay, this diagram show 100 national outsourcing destination. It compares several countries with mature IT outsourcing industries on cost and quality of IT skill sets from the perspective of an American firm's business need. Okay, you can see that the India might be the best because with the low cost, they can supply high quality IT skill. So based on this diagram, okay, for example, we can see in a real practice, right? Many firms are hired programmers from India. So I think that's the reason. Okay. These are 5 considerations of where to outsource. The first consideration is time zone. It is about an overlapping time zone or follow the sun spacing preferable. Okay. This figure maps the time zones of the major outsourcing destinations relative to 8 a.m. In the United States East Coast. The second one is skill set. Match the region's IT skills to your project's needs. For example, Israel and Russia are particularly strong in embedded programming. Okay, Canada, India, and Ireland is custom developed business application. Okay, the third one is country profile. Okay, who is already outsourcing there? Okay, how many vendor exist? Is it politically stable? Okay, these are the questions that you have to find the answer for country profile. Okay, the fourth one is cultural and language differences. Okay, are there language and cultural differences? You have to find the answer. Okay, the fifth one is legal sophistication. Okay, it is about what is the country's track record for intellectual property rights and legal enforcement for contract. Okay, we have to consider all these 5 questions, right, about where to outsource. Okay, to summarize this chapter, IT sourcing basically is a strategic choice. Okay, obvious cost alone should never solely drive the decision about whether you will do your custom IT development in-house or outside. So IT outsourcing usually fails because challenges in integrating an outsourced project with your firm's existing IT assets, or because the wrong system gets delivered. Okay, some IT projects should never be outsourced. Okay, for example, projects that are mission critical, they are competitively differentiating, or require intense interaction between business users and IT specialists. Okay, they are better kept in-house. So if your IT unit lacks the technical skills to do them, doing more on upfront design in-house, which is we call it tapered outsourcing, in order to reduce the risk. Okay, so the third one is outsourcing lengthens the chain of responsibility. Okay, a vendor is accountability to your IT unit for meeting a project technical specification, and your IT unit is accountable to non-IT managers for the project achieving its business objectives. Okay. The last one, do not let outsourcing be a one-way street, because excessive IT outsourcing can eventually hollow out in-house IT capabilities. So concurrent IT sourcing prevents it from becoming an irreversible choice. So that's all for chapter 8, IT sourcing. I end this video with Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. Thank you.